Protectionism and globalization. Introduction. First of all, protectionism is a doctrine which advocates measures to penalize foreign competition with tariffs. Protectionism refers to an interventionism from state that will, with tariffs, promote exportations and limit importations to foster national companies and to regulate trade deficit.
The globalization is the exchange accelerating of people, goods, services and capital, technology, cultural practices. Worldwide, it has been sped up by OMC's creation. We can set an outreach of those doctrines. We can link protectionism to interventionist policies and link globalization to liberal policies.
As a first part, let's focus on globalization or protectionism impact on economy, with the example of trade war the USA versus China. The trade war between the USA and China is the perfect example of imbalance between protectionism and liberalism. It came from USA. Actually, Donald Trump in 2018 wants to slow down the expansion of the Chinese industry in the American soil. First of all, the USA acts on imports by increasing custom fees on Chinese goods, up to 30% on the first year. Trump then established a few measures which most of the time aim China's products. In addition of acting imports, Trump targets directly Chinese corporations. For example, in 2018, the USA forbids ZTE, an important telephones producer, to use of American components of their products.
In August the same year, the American Congress voted a law which prohibits the use of equipment made by Chinese firms in American administration. This law targets products from Huawei, ZTE Hikvision and Dahua Technology to secondary camera constructor security, and Itera Communication, a firm which makes radio. On July the 20th, Donald Trump is ready to establish, if needed, punitive taxes up to $500 billion, so the entire Chinese production imported by the USA, while Chinese money plummets by benefiting Chinese exporters.
China sets a list of goods which represents an exchange volume between two countries of $15 billion. This measure has an impact on soy, beef, cotton, tobacco, whiskey and automobile sector. China asks for a guaranteed deposit of order of 178% of cargo's values for the importation of sorghum from the USA. As we said it before, this idea of trade war came from the USA. China only took protectionist measures to prevent and defend themselves against the perpetual attacks of the USA. Indeed, in May 2018, next to the numerous negotiations with the USA, China slows down gradually its restrictions.
Protectionism, which is developed in the USA under Trump's presidency, has many impacts, most of the time negative, on the American growth and on national businesses, which creates an asymmetry between the policy's goal of Donald Trump and reality. Production costs became more expensive for firms, especially for the small ones, which can hardly diversify their suppliers. Some new goods are focused by Trump. These are huge consumption products, so customers will be impacted faster. Overall, this aggressive custom policy risks leading to some bad effects on American growth, which achieved 3.2% for the first trimester.
Behind their free trader image, the USA doesn't hesitate about applying protectionist measures to ensure sustainability of their trade interests. In the USA, we can count more than 1,280 measures about protectionism, which puts them leader. We can mention the recent notion of coronavirus, COVID-19, which makes borders closed, exchange are closed too, so economies and countries shut themselves down.
Beyond this trade war between the USA and China, the actual capitalist and liberalist system is as much criticized as praised. And here is the foundation of rupture between globalism and isolationism. So we will introduce the pros and cons of the globalization.
About the pros, globalization is an economic power. Indeed, multinationals have been developed, thus sales markets, jobs and much more. Customers have increasingly more choices, and this opening to the world lead them to consume more. It has generated a consequent development of government agencies. For example, peace and security maintained with the UNO, standard of living have improved in most countries, and more precisely, the living standard has highly increased. For example, nowadays, a majority of households have access to the result of NICT's developings, and it has contributed to the stabilization of living standards all around the world, although it isn't perfectly stable yet. And it has contributed to get closer as best as they could to developed countries. The developing countries have been able to get out of poverty thanks to humanitarian aids and capital contributions. Their economic growth has been able to take shape. Planetary values have been shared, for example, the protection of the environment with Amazonia's destruction. Brazilian's dam that will destruct this forest have been prevented thanks to the new global strength. Tourism and immigration have promoted job creation to the extent that jobs linked to import-export, to international exchanges have been developed and populations moving is stronger. We can see 1.5 billion tourists worldwide in 2019.
However, this globalization presents cons, but not at least. To the extent that who says globalization says power fight for the first place of world's leading power. Indeed, the USA empowered the whole world, particularly capitalist country. Their influence is so strong that we assist to the world Americanization. Multinationals use cheap labor and doesn't promote their own workforce. Strong concurrence brings disappearance of small producers and limits trade unions' action to the extent that the goal is to be as much competitive as possible, or at least more than the other power. The businesses that do it have in addition more power than some governments, so they can negotiate in their favor taxes, wages. Banks must concentrate global wealth for financial elite. Managing the financial crisis. I'm sorry. Managing the financial crisis become a headache. Accordingly, globalization makes crisis harder to manage. And finally, the fear of a market crash despite IMF stays strong. In developing countries, we also assist to a homogenization of cultures, hence the disappearance of local cultures. And lastly, globalization makes corruption and illegal traffics easier.
As a second part, let's focus on isolationism and liberalism, an actual debate to all scales. And let's take the case of Brexit.
There are two ambivalent visions about Brexit. Some people see it as a reaffirmation and a strengthening of Anglo-Saxon protectionism. Besides, some people see an opportunity for Great Britain to come in an ultra-liberalism phase, to exercise a total free trade and without any constraint, in order to create new alliances and trade with new globalization's actors. For Britain, the vision of ultra-liberalism gets ahead. Indeed, Brexit wouldn't represent a closure of Great Britain throughout the world, but rather a real opening total and without any obstruction, said Theresa May, the former Prime Minister. Europe is a hindrance for free trade as Britain wants it. They justified this Brexit with four ways: immigration control, to restore national sovereignty, to create a boat who gets drowned, and to free themselves of Brussels regulation. They wanted to trade freely with the whole world.
There is a Eurosceptic which has been installed in Great Britain, but also, and particularly, feelings of abandonment from citizens who have the feeling to suffer undergo this globalization. In other words, the fundamental rift of this vote is between the winners and the losers of the globalization. The actual form of globalization reorganizes systematically spaces and people. By the way, it makes inequalities get worse. On the one hand, there is a huge megalopolis connected with global economy, and on the other hand, other territories which sink and become precarious. In 2019, Britain devoted at the head of the government, the Conservative Party, which is a liberal conservative party and especially Eurosceptic, who will actually apply Brexit in January of 2019. It's a party which is mainly liberalist economically, which critiques the welfare state and which is attached to traditions a lot. Even if they aren't measurable yet, the result of Brexit could be dramatic according to some geopolitics, as much as the decline of trade exchanges, financials, as jobs and competitivity of Anglo-Saxons template. They see Brexit as a break for exchanges, a fence to globalization, which makes stand out of those politicians' decision a real feeling of strong protectionism.
Now let's talk about the very actual case of COVID-19. The fracture which exists between protectionism and liberalism is still an actual subject, and it's in moments a huge global crisis of questioning of our economic, financial, social and geopolitical system, that the debate come back to the center of preoccupation. Thereby, taking the very actual case of COVID-19, we can easily measure the policy's impact on crisis management and on its resolution. Actually, two visions are developing throughout this crisis. Protectionists will be inclined to say that if we are in this situation, it's particularly because of this almost total globalization, which is verified as well as the good exchanges plan and populations moving. This health crisis development would only be the cause of sharing goods, services and almost populations.
This vision can be supported by drafting of different countries affected who have for goal combat this crisis in stopping every exchanges of every types with other states, and in continuing firstly some national interests and national solidarities before international interests. We can mention, for example, closing the Schengen area in Europe. We found here the USA, North Korea or more Russia. Moreover, Trump has revealed that the USA will always choose the independence rather than global governance, control and domination. At the same time, in front of the crisis, as a more liberal, globalist vision sees in this crisis the way to strengthen the links among the different countries. This is the case of Europe, China, etc.
In fact, this is thanks to this solidarity that countries who need resources could find it in neighborhood countries. It's thanks to this economic integration that countries near to financial crisis could count on financial institutions like central banks or IMF to redress financial markets balance. In this sense, France has created an airlift with China to convey 600 million Chinese masks to France, which misses resources.
In any cases, most economics agree with the fact that this health crisis will reveal states and people. Indeed, today capitalism and globalization are totally anchored streams in our contemporary societies. But this could be questioned by some states that could see their personal interests higher than international interests. It's only in a few months that we will be able to realize the impact of decisions, anti-globalist and liberalist, on countries which are at the origin, and what would be the best choice to face this crisis and to face this rift between isolationism and globalism.
So to conclude, we can say that globalization is really anchored in our societies. Liberalist ideas are many and a lot of states want to exchange with other countries. They want an economic growth thanks to comparative advantage. But we thought that liberalism, global economic governance, is sometimes questioned. Indeed, some protectionist ideas are emerging, like some conservative or nationalist parties. So we could ask a question: will globalization be in decline, or can it continue?
Thanks a lot. Hope it will be easy to understand and to watch. And sorry for the cats and the great accent. Sorry, and see you soon.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.